The Starweaver's Daughter. The sky above the planet Aluris was a tapestry of swirling colors, a canvas painted by the hands of the cosmos itself. Jara stood on the edge of a cliff, her fingers tracing patterns in the air. As she moved, strands of starlight followed her touch, weaving together into a shimmering fabric that glowed with an otherworldly light. She was a starweaver, one of the last of her kind, and her gift was both a blessing and a curse. Jara's people had once been revered across the galaxy, their ability to weave starlight into tangible forms a source of wonder and power. But now, they were hunted. A shadowy organization known as the Void Syndicate sought to exploit their abilities, using the woven starlight to fuel their own dark ambitions. Jara had been on the run for years, moving from planet to planet, always one step ahead of her pursuers. As she finished weaving a small star-shaped pendant, Jara felt a familiar pang of loneliness. She had no family, no friends, no one to share her gift with. The only company she had was the stars themselves, and even they seemed distant and cold. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. Jara spun around, her heart racing. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man dressed in a tattered cloak with a blaster strapped to his side. His eyes were sharp, his expression unreadable. "You're not easy to find," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "But then again, I've always enjoyed a challenge." Jara took a step back, her hand instinctively reaching for the pendant she had just woven. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice trembling slightly. "Name's Kale," the man replied, his lips curling into a faint smile. "And you, my dear, are worth a fortune to the right people." Jara's heart sank. He was a bounty hunter, sent by the Void Syndicate to capture her. She had been so careful, so cautious, but it seemed her luck had finally run out. "I'm not going with you," she said, her voice firm despite the fear coursing through her veins. Kale chuckled, a sound that sent a shiver down Jara's spine. "You don't have a choice," he said, taking a step closer. "But don't worry, I'll make sure you're treated well. The Syndicate pays handsomely for live specimens." Jara's mind raced. She couldn't fight him, not with his blaster and his experience. But she couldn't let him take her either. She glanced at the pendant in her hand, an idea forming in her mind. "You think you can catch me?" she said, forcing a smile. "You're not the first to try." Before Kale could react, Jara threw the pendant to the ground. It shattered on impact, releasing a burst of starlight that blinded him momentarily. Jara turned and ran, her feet carrying her across the rocky terrain as fast as they could. Kale cursed, shaking off the effects of the starlight. He took off after her, his movements swift and precise. Jara could hear him gaining on her, his footsteps echoing in her ears. She knew she couldn't outrun him, but she had to try. As she ran, Jara's mind raced. She needed a plan, something to throw him off her trail. She spotted a cave up ahead, its entrance hidden by a curtain of vines. Without hesitation, she dived inside, hoping to lose him in the darkness. The cave was cool and damp, the air thick with the scent of earth and moss. Jara pressed herself against the wall, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. She could hear Kale outside, his footsteps slowing as he searched for her. "You can't hide forever," he called out, his voice echoing in the cave. "Come out, and I'll make this easy for you." Jara didn't respond. She closed her eyes, focusing on the starlight within her. She could feel it pulsing, a steady rhythm that matched the beat of her heart. She reached out with her mind, weaving the starlight into a barrier that would shield her from Kale's sight. For a moment, there was silence. Then, Jara heard Kale's footsteps again, this time moving away from the cave. She let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding, her body sagging with relief. But her relief was short-lived. As she stepped out of the cave, she found herself face to face with Kale once again. He had been waiting for her, his blaster trained on her chest. "Clever," he said, his voice tinged with admiration. "But not clever enough." Jara's heart sank. She had no more tricks up her sleeve, No more starlight to weave. She was trapped. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Don't do this." Kale's expression softened for a moment, but then he shook his head. "I'm sorry," he said, "but I have my own demons to face." As he reached for her, a voice echoed through the air, deep and resonant. "Leave her be, Kale." Both Jara and Kale turned to see an old man standing at the edge of the cliff. His robes were tattered, his face lined with age, but his eyes burned with a fierce intensity. "Orin," Kale said, his voice filled with surprise. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same question," Orin replied, his gaze never leaving Kale's. "You were once a man of honor. What happened to you?" Kale's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Instead, he lowered his blaster and took a step back. "Go," Orin said, his voice firm. "Leave her be." Kale hesitated for a moment, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. Jara stared at Orin, her mind reeling. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I am Orin, guardian of the Celestial Archives," he replied. "And you, Jara, are the key to a prophecy that has been waiting for centuries." Jara's eyes widened. "A prophecy?" Orin nodded. "Come with me, and I will show you the truth." Without waiting for a response, Orin turned and began to walk away. Jara hesitated for a moment, then followed, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and curiosity. As they walked, the stars above seemed to shine brighter, as if they were watching over her. Jara didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope. The flame of Zorith. Lyra stood at the edge of the molten river, her crimson armor reflecting the fiery glow of the lava below. The air was thick with heat and the acrid scent of sulfur, but she barely noticed. Her mind was focused on one thing: the flame of Zorith. Once it had been the heart of her planet, a source of endless energy that had sustained her people for millennia. Now it was dying, and with it, her world. The flame of Zorith was no ordinary fire. It was a living entity, a sentient force that had existed since the dawn of time. It was said that the flame could grant immense power to those who could control it, but it was also volatile, capable of consuming entire worlds if not properly contained. Lyra's ancestors had been the guardians of the flame, tasked with keeping it alive and balanced. But now, the flame was flickering, its light dimming with each passing day. Lyra clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. She would not let her world die. She would find a way to reignite the flame, no matter the cost. Her journey had led her to the planet Krylos, a desolate wasteland known for its black markets and lawless inhabitants. It was here that she hoped to find Dren, a smuggler with a reputation for getting people in and out of impossible situations. If anyone could help her reach the flame's core, it was him. Lyra found Dren in a dingy cantina, surrounded by a group of rough-looking individuals. He was tall and lean, with a roguish grin and a glint of mischief in his eyes. His ship, the Zephyr, was parked outside, a sleek vessel that looked like it had seen better days. "You're Dren?" Lyra asked, stepping up to his table. Dren looked up, his grin widening. "That depends. Who's asking?" "My name's Lyra," she said, her voice steady. "I need your help." Dren raised an eyebrow. "Help with what?" "I need to get to the core of Zorith," Lyra replied. "And I need a ship that can handle the heat." Dren's grin faded, replaced by a look of disbelief. "You're joking, right? The core of Zorith is a death trap. No ship can survive that kind of heat." "Mine can," Lyra said, her eyes locking with his. "If you're as good as they say you are." Dren studied her for a moment, then leaned back in his chair. "You're serious, aren't you?" "Deadly serious," Lyra replied. Dren sighed, running a hand through his hair. "All right, let's say I agree to this suicide mission. What's in it for me?" "Name your price," Lyra said. Dren's eyes gleamed. 10,000 credits, up front. Lyra didn't flinch. "Done." Dren blinked, surprised by her quick agreement. You've got guts, I'll give you that. All right, you've got yourself a deal. But don't say I didn't warn you. The Zephyr was unlike any ship Lyra had ever seen. Its interior was a maze of wires and makeshift repairs, but it had a certain charm to it. As they prepared for takeoff, Lyra couldn't help but notice the ship's AI, Zora, who appeared as a holographic projection of a woman with sharp features and a no-nonsense attitude. So, you're the one who's going to get us killed, Zora said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Nice to meet you too, Lyra replied dryly. Dren chuckled as he took the pilot's seat. Don't mind Zora. She's just jealous because you're prettier than her. I am not jealous, Zora snapped. I'm concerned. The core of Zorath is no place for amateurs. I'm not an amateur, Lyra said, her voice firm. I've trained for this my entire life. Zora crossed her arms, her holographic form flickering slightly. We'll see. As the Zephyr lifted off, Lyra felt a surge of determination. She was one step closer to saving her world, but she knew the hardest part was yet to come. The journey to Zorath was fraught with danger. The planet's atmosphere was thick with ash and debris, making navigation nearly impossible. Dren's skills as a pilot were put to the test as he maneuvered the ship through the turbulent skies. This is insane, Dren muttered as the ship shuddered violently. We're not going to make it. We have to, Lyra said, her eyes fixed on the view screen. We're almost there. As they approached the core, the heat became unbearable. The ship's systems began to overheat, alarms blaring throughout the cabin. We can't take much more of this, Zora warned. The hull is starting to melt. Just a little further, Lyra urged. Dren gritted his teeth, pushing the ship to its limits. Finally, they broke through the ash clouds, revealing the core of Zorath. It was a massive, swirling vortex of fire, its light blinding and its heat intense. There it is, Lyra whispered, her heart racing. The flame of Zorath. Dren stared at the vortex, his face pale. You're not seriously thinking of going in there, are you? I have to, Lyra said. It's the only way. Dren shook his head. You'll die. Maybe, Lyra replied. But I have to try. Before Dren could stop her, Lyra activated her armor's thermal shielding and opened the airlock. The heat hit her like a wall, but she pushed through, her eyes fixed on the flame. As she approached the vortex, she felt a strange pull, as if the flame was calling to her. She reached out, her hand trembling as she touched the edge of the fire. Suddenly, the flame surged, engulfing her in its light. Lyra felt a surge of energy, a power unlike anything she had ever experienced. It was as if the flame was alive, its consciousness merging with hers. Who are you? A voice echoed in her mind, deep and resonant. I am Lyra, she replied, her voice steady. Guardian of the flame. The flame seemed to pulse, its light intensifying. Why have you come? To save my world, Lyra said. To save you. The flame was silent for a moment. Then it spoke again. You are brave, Lyra. But the flame cannot be reignited by bravery alone. You must prove your worth. How? Lyra asked. By facing your greatest fear, the flame replied. Before Lyra could respond, the world around her shifted. She found herself standing in a dark, empty void, her heart pounding in her chest. What is this? She whispered. Your fear, the flame said. Face it, and the flame will be yours. Lyra took a deep breath, her mind racing. She didn't know what her greatest fear was, but she knew she couldn't back down. She had come too far to fail now. As she stepped forward, the void began to change. Shadows twisted and shifted, forming shapes that sent a chill down her spine. She saw her people, her world, consumed by darkness. She saw herself, alone and powerless, unable to save them. No, Lyra whispered, her voice trembling. This isn't real. It is, the flame said. This is what you fear most. Failure. Lyra clenched her fists, her eyes filling with tears. I won't fail. I can't. The shadows closed in around her, their whispers growing louder. Lyra felt a surge of panic, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had to face this, had to overcome it. I am Lyra, she said, her voice growing stronger. I am the guardian of the flame. I will not fail. As she spoke, the shadows began to recede, their whispers fading into silence. The void around her dissolved, replaced by the light of the flame. You have proven your worth, the flame said. The flame is yours. Lyra felt a surge of energy as the flame merged with her, its power flowing through her veins. She opened her eyes, her body glowing with an intense light. When she returned to the Zephyr, Dren and Zora stared at her in awe. What happened? Dren asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I reignited the flame, Lyra said, a smile spreading across her face. My world is saved. Dren shook his head, a grin spreading across his face. You're insane, you know that. Maybe, Lyra replied, but it worked. As the Zephyr made its way back to Krylos, Lyra felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. She had faced her greatest fear and emerged victorious. The flame of Zorath was alive once more, and with it, her world would thrive again. The dreamer of Nebulos. Nissa's dreams were never ordinary. They were vivid, immersive, and often felt more real than her waking life. She could feel the wind on her skin, smell the scents of distant worlds, and hear the whispers of beings that existed only in the realm of sleep. But lately, her dreams had started to bleed into reality, and it was becoming a problem. It began with small things. A flower she had dreamed of would appear on her bedside table, or a song she had heard in her sleep would echo in her mind long after she woke. But then, the changes became more drastic. One morning, she woke to find her room filled with a dense, swirling mist that hadn't been there the night before. Another time, she stepped outside to find the sky had turned a deep, unnatural shade of purple. Nissa didn't know what was happening to her, but she knew she needed help. That's how she found herself standing outside the laboratory of Torin, a renowned scientist who specialized in the study of reality and its many anomalies. The laboratory was a sprawling complex of glass and steel, perched on the edge of a cliff overlooking the vast ocean of Nebulos. Nissa hesitated for a moment before pressing the button on the intercom. State your business. A voice crackled through the speaker. My name is Nissa, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I need to speak with Torin. It's urgent. There was a pause, then the door slid open with a soft hiss. Nissa stepped inside, her eyes widening as she took in the sight of the laboratory. It was filled with strange machines and glowing holograms, the air humming with energy. You're Nissa, a voice said, drawing her attention. She turned to see a man approaching her, his eyes sharp and curious. He was tall and lean, with a mop of unruly hair and a lab coat that looked like it had seen better days. Yes, Nissa replied. Are you Torin? I am, he said, extending a hand. What brings you here? Nissa took a deep breath. I think my dreams are changing reality. Torin's eyebrows shot up. Changing reality. That's quite a claim. I know it sounds crazy, Nissa said, her voice pleading. But it's true. I can show you. Torin studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right. Let's see what you can do. Torin led Nissa to a small, dimly lit room filled with monitors and sensors. He gestured for her to sit on a reclining chair in the center of the room. This is a dream monitoring chamber, he explained. It will allow me to observe your dreams in real time and measure any anomalies. Nissa nodded, her heart racing. She had never shared her dreams with anyone before, and the idea of someone watching them made her uneasy. But she knew she had no choice. As she laid back in the chair, Torin attached a series of electrodes to her temples and chest. Just relax, he said. Let yourself drift off. Nissa closed her eyes, focusing on her breathing. It didn't take long for her to fall asleep. When Nissa opened her eyes, she was standing in a vast, open field. The sky above was a swirling mix of colors, and the air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers. She looked around, her heart pounding. This was one of her dreams, but it felt more vivid than ever. "Nissa," a voice called out, drawing her attention. She turned to see Torin standing a few feet away, his eyes wide with wonder. "You're here," Nissa said, her voice trembling. "In my dream." "I am," Torin replied, his voice filled with awe. "This is incredible. Your mind is creating an entire world." As they walked through the field, Torin began to take notes, his eyes darting around as he observed the details of the dream. But then, something strange happened. The sky began to darken, and the ground beneath their feet started to tremble. "What's happening?" Nissa asked, her voice filled with panic. "I don't know," Torin replied, his eyes wide. "But we need to wake up." Before they could do anything, the ground split open, and a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a woman, her eyes glowing with an eerie light. She was tall and slender, with long, flowing hair that seemed to blend into the darkness around her. "Who are you?" Nissa asked, her voice trembling. "I am Vera," the woman replied, her voice echoing in the air. "The Dreamer of Nebulos." "The Dreamer of Nebulos," Torin repeated, his voice filled with confusion. "What does that mean?" Vera smiled, a cold, calculating smile. "It means I am the one who controls this realm. And now I have found you, Nissa." Nissa's heart raced. "What do you want from me?" "Your power," Vera replied. "With it, I can merge the dream world with reality. I can create a new world, one where I am the ruler." "You're insane," Torin said, stepping forward. "You can't just merge two worlds. It would cause chaos." Vera's smile widened. "Chaos is exactly what I want." Before Nissa or Torin could react, Vera raised her hand, and the world around them began to dissolve. Nissa felt a surge of panic as she was pulled into the darkness. When Nissa woke up, she was back in the laboratory, her heart pounding in her chest. Torin was already awake, his face pale and his eyes wide. "What happened?" Nissa asked, her voice trembling. "Vera," Torin replied, his voice filled with fear. "She's real, and she's coming for you." Nissa's mind raced. "What do we do?" Torin took a deep breath. "We need to stop her. If she merges the dream world with reality, it could destroy everything." Nissa nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then we'll stop her. Together." Over the next few days, Torin and Nissa worked tirelessly to prepare for Vera's arrival. Torin used his knowledge of reality and dreams to create a device that could stabilize the boundaries between the two worlds, while Nissa practiced controlling her powers, learning to manipulate the dream world to her advantage. But they knew it wouldn't be enough. Vera was powerful, and she had been preparing for this moment for a long time. When Vera finally appeared, it was in the middle of the night. Nissa was asleep when she felt the familiar pull of the dream world, but this time she was ready. She found herself standing in a dark, empty void, Vera standing before her, her eyes glowing with an eerie light. "You can't stop me," Vera said, her voice filled with confidence. "I have to try," Nissa replied, her voice steady. As Vera raised her hand, Nissa focused all her energy, creating a barrier of light that pushed back against the darkness. The two forces clashed, the air around them crackling with energy. "You're strong," Vera said, her voice filled with surprise. "But not strong enough." Nissa gritted her teeth, her mind racing. She knew she couldn't defeat Vera alone. She needed Torin's help. As if on cue, Torin appeared beside her, his device in hand. "Now," he shouted, activating the device. A surge of energy filled the void, stabilizing the boundaries between the dream world and reality. Vera screamed as the darkness around her began to dissolve, her form flickering and fading. "No," she shouted, her voice filled with rage. "This isn't over." But it was. As the void dissolved, Nissa and Torin found themselves back in the laboratory, the air around them calm and still. "Did we do it?" Nissa asked, her voice trembling. We did, Torin replied, a smile spreading across his face. Vera is gone. Nissa let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding, her body sagging with relief. But she knew this wasn't the end. Vera had been defeated, but the dream world was still a dangerous place. We need to be careful, Nissa said, her voice filled with determination. The dream world is powerful, and it's not something to be taken lightly. Torin nodded, his expression serious. Agreed. But together, I think we can handle it. Nissa smiled, a sense of peace washing over her. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was in control. And with Torin by her side, she knew she could face whatever challenges lay ahead.